Welcome, everybody, to the Tenbound Selling Your Truths webinar. We're excited to have everybody here today. We have some extremely special guests today. Troy Kanter, who is from the CEO and co-founder of Octus IQ. Could not be more excited. A couple words from on your end here.
No, it's been great to work with you and the team at Tenbound. And you mentioned being a college athlete. Like some people speak in years, I speak in pounds. So I say that was 25 pounds ago.
I'm right there with you. I'm about 25-ish as well. So I'm right there with you. Let's get into it, Troy. What do we got?
Yeah, awesome. So there's, Pete, as we've been talking, there's just enormous change that's going on in the field of selling. And, you look at any of the popular media, I mean, selling's harder now than when we started this call 5 minutes ago. But, I think there's some misguided concepts. And, and as you and I talked about this, like, let's just kind of break down. There are just kind of like four basic kind of truths that I think bring some simplicity and bring some direction to how we get to the other side of these complexities that we're facing and figure out how to create enormous value, not only, for our organizations, but for ourselves as business leaders, as sales leaders, as individual sellers. Truth one, and again, the B2B buyer is more elusive than ever. Now you can talk about, is that because of technology? Is that because, the number of influencers, it's more complex than it's ever been? What has the change in the access of information that the buyers have at their fingertips compared to 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago? Like, all of that is true. And they're forcing us to kind of change the model, whether we like it or not. And there's this really simple graphic here that I really like to talk about. Whether you know it or not, B2B companies go to market one of four ways. And sometimes companies are really deliberate about one of these methods, and sometimes they just kind of find themselves in one of these. And the four are, there's transactional, and that's really heating up, and there's enormous value being created there. That is that sort of frictionless self-service model that customers can transact how, when, and where they want. They perceive enormous value because it kind of, in a lot of cases, it takes the seller out of the equation, brings down price, brings down simplicity. But if you're selling something complex, we've got to, and you are trying to build a great career in the area of sales, that clearly isn't a path. Out to the far right, the other model that's experiencing enormous success is this model of a trusted advisor. And companies that are going transactional are really deliberate about it, and companies that are going trusted advisor are really, really deliberate about it. But, what's the definition of this sort of trusted advisor model? And it really is that your sales process is so effective, and you as a seller is so effective that people would have paid for that interaction. They actually would have paid for the sales call. That the selling process actually becomes part of your company's value proposition. And how you get ready to do that is incredibly different than how 80% of the companies in the B2B space are actually going to market now, which is in the middle of this barbell, in that kind of product orientation or solution orientation. So many companies are still hiring, training, messaging, interacting with customers on a feature benefit. And then those that feel that they've invested a bunch of money and become more sophisticated to sort of introduce this solutions model, which is really, ask penetrating, probing, challenging kind of questions to figure out what your problems are. And then I'm going to step back and then give you a feature benefit pitch on how my product or solution or my product or service fits that solution. And customers are categorically, totally rejecting that. They either want to self-serve out to the left, or they want the process to be so entirely effective that it makes them better at their job. And so how do you do that?
Troy, I'm gonna stop you right there. I don't think we don't have the screen share going, so we need to make sure to get that deck up and shared there. People are interested, and they're excited to know what you're talking about, and they're talking in the chat here. What's going on? So
again, you can see this kind of barbell model. Just again, not to go through the whole thing again, but the areas at which customers perceive value are on the far ends. It's a transactional, self-service, frictionless model, or again, out to the far right. How do I interact with a salesperson that creates so much value during the sales process? I would have actually paid for that as a consultation. It's the same, counsel, guidance, and advice during the sales process as I would have paid $1,500 for an industry analyst to sit with me and teach me and educate me about what the potential options are and how I can solve these unique problems that I'm facing.
Awesome. As far as from your experience, right, it's how can you get out of the middle there, right? What are some strategies or something that you have seen that have worked to get, to one of the faster and cheaper or the business outcome side?
I think it really starts with the readiness and capabilities of your sellers. And so many people are still hiring, training, preparing their reps really around, again, a methodology that really is about that being in the middle, a feature, functionality, benefits, kind of solutions orientation. And there is a shift in behavior, a shift in interaction that occurs. And I really think that's kind of tees us up for that second truth, Pete. If you go to the next slide, it's like readiness is everything. And especially, I've studied this for, it's 20 plus years now. And we've studied what differentiates those exceptional salespeople, those people that drive enormous value, outsized quota attainment, outsized margin attainment, outsized cross-sell rates. And it's fascinating, and it's really changed over the last few years. And if you click to the next one, it kind of puts it in, what we all remember from, Psych 101 back in the college days. There's like a Maslow's hierarchy of how you really evolve to this trusted selling methodology. And if you just kind of grade yourself here, those that are thinking about this and watching it, at the base, it's people still buy from people that they like. Relationships are critically important, but rarely is that enough anymore. It goes to that next step of a deep understanding of your prospects' challenges, and you understand it and they perceive you as being a great listener. But this is where it starts to break down, where I really see a difference between solution salespeople and trusted advisor salespeople is that third rung. And that solutions orientation, it's about, well, I understand what your problems are. I've crafted a solution with what it is that I'm selling that you now know that I can beat or exceed your base expectations. Great. But you want to dramatically add about a 50% increase to your win rates. This is the pivot. Can you make a promise? Solution salespeople solve problems. Trusted advisors make a promise on how I'm going to change my prospect's career. I'm going to change their profitability. I'm going to change the way they do business. And it's believable. It grabs them. It embraces them. All of a sudden, you make that shift. It goes up to this next level where now you are of value, you are of service, and they have this, they want your counsel. They want your guidance. They're actually calling you even on things that don't even have to do with your product or service. And then the pinnacle is teaching. When your prospects say, I learned something from her, or he taught me how to do my job better, win rates go through the roof. It's everything. And that's actually probably one of the best questions you can ask yourself as a seller when you leave that Zoom call, or hopefully here in the next few months, when you leave the conference room. Did they learn something? If I called them back and said, was that sales call so good you would have paid for it? If the answer is a yes, your win rate's going to be north of 90%.
That's awesome. As far as that, it seems like a lot of, everything kind of hinges on that promise, right? And getting to that promise. As far as, it's easy for young salespeople to make somewhat false promises within the sales process, right? And potentially set their CS orgs up for failure at some point. But I'm curious if there's any kind of insight into that promise and how you should go about identifying what that promise is, as well as, even making it, or how you deliver it, right?
Yeah. Again, if you look at it, there's a practical piece that I'll talk about. So it's a great question, Pete. And then I'll go back to these, massive data sets that we've accumulated. I just look at it just from the analytics of this. The key difference is people that can make those promises with credibility, they become deep subject matter experts of their product, solution, or craft. It is if all of a sudden when you roll into the conference room and you've got someone else running your demo, or you've got to drag along additional schmees, and you've got, an executive that you have to bring along to do the point of view, that has such a damaging element to being able to make that promise. Now, it feels like you're overwhelming the room and you're providing a lot of information but from a personal level, the deeper the expertise on your craft and the deeper your expertise on the industry verticals that you're selling into, it really gives you an added level of credibility to make that leap. And when you study win-loss analysis, and you get it from the customer's perspective, not the salesperson perspective on why a deal was won or lost, there's a magic about how they rate you on listening. That the higher they rate you on your listening ability is incredibly predictive. So when you look at what the sales forces are saying, well, we lost on price, feature, functionality, and then you go ask the prospect, it really comes back to there was a lack of listening, a lack of understanding. And when you start asking about, did they teach you? Did you learn anything? It's like, they don't even know what you're talking about.
Exactly. It makes a lot of sense. If you don't listen to somebody, right? How can you teach them anything? How can you know them well enough to teach them anything, right?
Yep.
That's awesome. All right.
Yeah, well said. And, again, being in the business of studying this and measuring this, there's this concept of readiness. And there are two components to it. There are attributes of being a trusted advisor seller, and there are skills. So first, let's start with the attribute component here. And just quickly, if you look at kind of the left half of this donut here, that execution doing, that motivation, striving, interaction relating, like those have stayed consistent over the last 20 years. You have to show up and be persuasive or responsible, have discipline, ambition, and confidence up there to the top left. You have to be able to build relationships and network. But the thing that all of a sudden in the last 5 years has become amazingly predictive of people who are delivering outsized quota and outsized margin is this bottom right, this learning agility, adaptability, and problem-solving capability has just been everything as we look at dealing with sellers who are able to, again, create outsized value in really complex situations. And again, 10 years ago, that wasn't showing up that much, but now it is one of the leading indicators of what's the likelihood of this person being successful. And as you understand that as a sales leader about every one of your sellers, if you go to the next slide, Pete, if you understand who the seller is, and as a seller, if you understand what your natural best swing is, you can then shrink time on the selling skills. So again, readiness is a combination of knowing who you naturally are, and then getting really good measurement and feedback on your ability to deliver each one of these skills at excellence and your business acumen. And so this is just a simple diagram of, we could argue and debate what you call them, but it's the life cycle of getting a complex deal done. There are 10 critical skills that no matter where you are in your career, you can continue to advance on them. And what's fascinating, if, for every 100 chief revenue officers or CEOs that I talk with, and we talk about this concept of readiness, everyone embraces it. They're like, yeah, I've got to get my people more ready. And it's like, well, do you have one pane of glass? Do you measure this? And people look at you with this deer in the headlight look like, oh, you can measure this? And it's like, yes, this is magic when it comes to accelerating the growth of your reps and accelerating the effectiveness of your sales force. You need one pane of glass about the readiness of every one of your reps, every one of your teams, every one of your leaders.
Awesome. Very cool.
Here's Pete, just a quick, this is a smaller sales force. And, all of a sudden you plot it. It's like, right within your CRM, all this data can exist. It just plugs right in. And we've got these great tools that allow you to do this. Well, all of a sudden now, this is a small sales force, but these are big deals, high margin deals. Like up and to the right, that's where we all want to live, right? The x-axis across the bottom is that readiness index. It's a combination of your attributes and your skills. The y-axis up the left is quota. And again, whatever your metric is, you want quota, you want margin, you want cross-sell, you graph it. And those dots are individual sellers. So all of us as sellers, all of us as business leaders want more in the upper right-hand corner. Well, if you look at the bottom right, what that really is, those are your C's and your B's. They possess the attributes in some areas of their skills. They're almost there. This is where individualized coaching and development can dramatically shift their performance. It's tough to make a C and A, but you can make a C a B. You can make a B and A, but to do that in a really deliberate way, you got to have the data. So how many of those at the bottom right can you shift up into the right, and then those at the bottom left, if we're honest with each other as business leaders or sales managers, that we're doing those human beings a disservice. We got to figure out, how do we reallocate them? Are they better at, running customer service, being on, the client service end of things, or finding other roles in your organization? But to kind of put in 2, 3, 4 quarters of, wishing these people into quota attainment, just, it's not good for them. It's not good for us as business leaders. But again, data is everything. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it.
Exactly. I think a quote comes to mind that hope is not a strategy, right? Constantly. Interesting. I'm curious to gather your thoughts a little bit on the readiness level versus obviously quota attainment, right, on the y-axis. Would you say that, activity or even effort has a big piece of this in the bottom right-hand corner, knowing that the readiness level is there, right? Or would you say the execution, or is it a combination of both?
No, that's a great question. That high volume always works. I've never heard anyone say, well, I worked too hard this quarter. That never comes up, right? But if you have the right metrics, and with technology now, it's like all of a sudden on each one of your sellers, you've got great data. You've got all the leading indicators in terms of their activity. You've got this readiness. And, one of our clients, if that little dot that, this is a case study that's down there around 80 on the bottom right, that individual, and this is a real client, this is an outlier, but this is the kind of work you can get done. That individual, you can see, had really good attributes, was almost there. There were 2 areas on those skills that he was lacking. One, he needed to refine the way he delivered the value prop, how he told the story. And his natural attribute was one of relationships. And so his coaching and guidance was how to personalize that. And then the second is he needed more tools on deal navigation. Well, all of a sudden you went to work for 2 to 3 quarters on those. In 2019, he did 700,000. Last year, he did 5.7 million of ARR. It just blew it out of the water. Now that's an outlier, but yet he got the personalized coaching and guidance and attention that just dramatically propelled him.
And anytime you can 8 to 10x quota, I think something has to be working for the most part, yeah. Right? And that's awesome. I mean, telling the story and understanding yourself. And I think a lot of times, right, salespeople or even sales leaders don't know what they're good or bad at a lot of times, right? So being able to see this, being able to map it with your real data is incredibly powerful, right? That's awesome.
Yeah, and that's one of the, Pete, your point is so right. It's like, if, I can't wait till we're doing this live at one of your conferences, because if we ask the room, if you've got 300 sellers sitting out there, and you just say, okay, in the last 90 days, how many of you received really quality, in-depth, individualized feedback on how to improve your performance? And so look for a raise of hands. It's going to be less than 20% of the audience.
Oh yeah. I mean, easily. I mean, I can be the first one that I'm guilty of that in my previous roles, right? It's difficult to do without tools and, without the ability to map this data, right? And it's a lot of times it's so close in front of your face. You get so close to it day to day. You don't take a step back often enough to be able to coach like this, right? So that's awesome. I like it. All right.
Yeah, that next, just quick, would be a, kind of a screenshot from, our technology platform, where this happens to be, just a quick 1-page dashboard on one of the sales leaders. So you can see down the left, what's their highest area of impact as it relates to the attributes, what's the lowest area of impact on the attributes, what their competitive differentiators. And then on the right-hand side, those are the skills to be a world-class sales leader and how those rank in terms of what their capabilities are against those. So in the bottom right is sort of their acumen as it relates to running a sales force and their industry knowledge of what it is they're representing. So again, just nice one-pagers on the sales force, one-pagers on each individual leader, each individual seller, with all kinds of coaching, guidance, and tips, tricks, and tools embedded within it.
Awesome. Incredibly helpful. It's fantastic. Okay. Number 3, what do we got?
Yeah, well, we've talked about this a lot, Pete, where, there's what are there? I think at last count, there were getting close to 300 AI platforms for sales. And so many of them, and a lot of these folks are my friends, and we've worked together over the years at different spots, that I just think there's only so many different ways you can put AI over the top of your CRM to get different graphs and charts on your funnel data and get different graphs and charts on all of your deals. There's this constant kind of inspection and different ways at which we're trying to calculate a forecast. I think there's some stuff in there, but it's not transformational. It's not transformational for the business. And more importantly, again, if the leading indicator of beating quota and creating value is the readiness of the seller, all of these most of these platforms are geared towards the sales ops people and geared toward, again, more ways of doing inspection. And so I think the companies that are really making a big difference, and not to make this a commercial about Octus, but what we're doing here is, how do you really provide the seller with critical interaction data? What is it that you're doing on a deal by deal basis, influencer by influencer basis? What are the critical activities? What are the critical buyer reciprocations that actually predict win rates? So that it almost turns a deal into kind of a gaming methodology where you get to watch the game film. Like Pete, we were talking about, reminiscent about our college days. You get a picture. And what that meant when you were on the mound going from high school to Division I baseball, and to have a coach actually film you and break it down and show you where your elbow was, show you where your release was. Like, watching the game film is everything to shrinking time. And so how, with these new tools and technologies, can we give each seller kind of the game film of how they're interacting with their customers?
Exactly. I think it's a fantastic point. I think there's 2 pieces there. One is actually delivering the game film. And then the second piece, right, is actually providing meaningful insights, right, in coaching and the ability to, to improve from that game film, right? And a lot of times with the technologies that are out there, there's many of them that are unbelievably good. At the same time, a lot of them can, provide all this data, but what do you do with it then, right? Where do you go with it? Even as a sales leader, a lot of these platforms, you take a look at it, you're like, this is fantastic, but now what? You kind of have this, cog in the wheel kind of stuck moment. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and where we see enormous value creation, if you click on this next one, is for the rep to self-inspect and then to have meaningful coaching conversations with the sales manager. So you're all dealing with the exact same data points. And again, we've studied tens of thousands of complex B2B transactions and looked at win rates, deal cycle times, target margin rate attainment. And there are 7 constructs that predict likelihood of winning. And as you look at these and we talk about them, again, these are things that, again, as sellers and as business leaders, well, yeah, I've heard of this before. Yeah, you've got to know who your buyer is. Number 2, you got to know who your influencers are. You got to know who you're competing against and why. You've got to know what your strategic competitive advantage is and win theme, diagnose the risks, establish a rhythm and cadence to how you close. And then again, number 7, what we've talked about is you got to teach. So we all know this, but we don't get feedback. Is the customer reciprocating as we're working the deal? And what are those really specific questions that we need to ask, and behaviors and actions that we need to take to really ensure these are getting done? And what we've done is simplified this. So under each one of these, there are 5 seller actions and or buyer reciprocations that as you're working a deal, it just sticks right in your CRM. And if you click on the next one, you can see how it just sits there where, down the left are your imperatives, and it gives you a dashboard up top where it's like, what's the likelihood of closing? This is a brand new opportunity. You click on the next slide and you've got a little bit of interaction on your deal. And you can see down the left-hand side there, who's your buyer, who your influencers, why you'll win, what have you taught them, so forth. You can see this rep has accomplished X number of the 5 on each one of them. And how it works on the right here, let's just take number 2. Who are the influencers? Like, a lot of us get stuck on that as selling now. The number of influencers so dramatically increased on most complex deals. And again, as simple as this is, people don't get measurement on it. Okay. Do I have all the influencers confirmed? Do I have access to them? Are they aligned on the business goals and objectives? Can they enthusiastically support the value prop? And has one or more of them become a coach or an advisor? And it's just binary. It's not like your CRM where you're just typing, 10, 20 minutes worth of notes. You're just clicking boxes. It's like, I've accomplished this or I haven't. And it's automatically giving you a deal confidence score. It's identifying where your risks are. And then down below there, you can see, well, what are my resources? Under discovery questions, what are the very best questions that I can ask at this phase to uncover what's going on at the organization? Under common objections, what are my company's very best selling stories to overcome all the objections at this phase? And now your manager, your chief revenue officer, you all have the exact same insights into the most meaningful, salient things that are occurring in your deal. It just takes all the guesswork and subjectivity out of it. And you so here you can see influencers are low, you go to work on it, you click to the next slide. And as you've accomplished 5 out of 5 on the left, you can see how it just automatically pops. And then you've got on the next one, just really rich data at your fingertips, deal by deal, likelihood that we're going to win. As a rep, where are my risks? Where are my gaps? How do I get a great follow-up plan? Because as a seller, typically what you're struggling with on the follow-up plan is, look, I know where my gates are. I know why I'm stuck. What I'm struggling with is, what's the next best question to ask? What's the next best interaction? Like, just give it to me. Well, we know these things, so let's put it at the fingertips of our sellers so that when they engage, they're not following up and just saying, hey, did you get the proposal? What did you think? You said you were going to share it with your CFO. Did she have any feedback? Well, those aren't high value questions, but as sellers, we just don't have really engaging, meaningful conversations at our fingertips, wherever the potential stuck is, to have that kind of conversation. And that's what we've really tried to do here is, incorporate unbelievable, macro level data to create what I think is probably one of the most predictive AI-based solutions for getting deals done, but bring it down to the micro level. So as a seller, it's just not about inspecting my deals. It's about, how do I get these done? And what are those conversations? And where are my gaps? Where are my risks? And how do I have a meaningful, objective conversation with my manager on how to get it solved?
Yeah, that's awesome. I continue. There's the age-old debate of sales being an art or a science, right? And we all know, of course, it's a bit of both at some point, right? But it's interesting to see a platform like this, that the art piece is up to the salesperson, but the science piece is sticky and it's here and it's binary, right? And it's a methodical approach to any deal. And it leaves the art up to the salesperson. Control their pitch, control their tone, control their cadence, whatever that may be, control how likable they are as a person, right? So you leave the science to the software, leave the art to the person. It's kind of a match made in heaven a little bit. It's not bad.
Yeah, and I was, Pete, I love that. Like, I was watching, I think last year, I was watching I'm a golfer, and I was watching one of the FedEx, I think Northern Trust, of the FedEx Cup end of the year playoff. And Peter Costas had, I thought, what was one of the most amazing quotes ever. He was, the conditions were horrible. It was raining and blowing, scores were dropping, but a few people were racing up the leaderboard. And he was talking about golfers, but I thought it was one of the most profound statements that applies to sales leadership I ever heard. He said, you know what, when times get really tough, the conditions are tough, the stress is high, the golfers who know their swing and trust their swing do better under the tough conditions. And then he went on to say, the world's greatest golf coaches don't teach you a process. They figure out who you are and what your swing is and help you own your swing. And that's where I think so much of this AI stuff is misguided, that it's at this macro level, which you have to have those data points, but the magic is in rep by rep, manager by manager. What's this rep's very best swing with this particular customer interaction? What are the gates, and how do we help each other get through those gates? And so, again, I know I don't want to sound corny about it, but it really was like the world's best know their swing and they trust it. And those that don't trust it, when times get tough, they fall off the leaderboard.
Yep, exactly. I mean, you look back, I mean, to stay on the sports analogy a little bit, you look back at Jordan's flu game, or, any time any athlete has ever been sick or something's ailing them, right? A lot of times you play your best at that point. I mean, I pitched a couple of my best games personally when I had, some things going on at home, or, school was struggling in school, or whatever it may be, just because your mind is off of it and you stop thinking and just truly get back to what you naturally have practiced millions of times, and you don't think about it, right? You just get out of your own head and go. And that's pretty cool. I like it a lot.
And the next one here, just to kind of transition to our last one here. But again, when you move, sure, you always have to have inspection, but when it moves from inspection and trying to like stump the chump to where are we on these deals, and how do we help each other get these things won, and have a mutual way at which we're working from the same page. And it's like, okay, let's get our next best pitch, our next best question, the next best story ready to overcome this objection. Like this isn't unusual. This is, we've got a lot of clients where what I want to show here, this is a company that's selling an outsourced technology within a particular industry vertical for an operation process, large complex deals. When all 5 of those sub questions by imperative are answered, this was last year's data. I mean, look at the win rates when you can, we were talking about that influencer question. When all 5 of those questions were answered, the win rates were 81% versus 33%. On that closing question, when you got through all of the gates that you need to accomplish to get through, to get the deal done and get it done in queue that you forecasted it, like that number is almost unbelievable. And that's the thing, when you really operationalize this stuff, it can be transformational, not only to your entire sales force, but what it means to us individually as sellers.
It's pretty wild. I mean, there's some insane statistics in here. I mean, you're looking at 50% pickups, right, in certain areas. Influencers, even on the why will we win, right? These 3 look to be some of the highest, even, who's the buyer? Obviously knowing who the buyer is obviously good, but I mean, 50 to 60% upticks in close rate. That's wild. All right. To round it out, last one here.
Yeah, let's finish it up. So it is, as you study sales forces that create enormous value versus the majority that don't, that sales leader is the single most under-optimized component of the process. And I think all of us have spent our lives doing this, and we really know that there's an art and a science to selling. And most of us that get the big job, it's because we were great at the art. And there's no place to go to learn the science. And that's what we've tried to do here. As you've studied thousands of organizations and tens of thousands of highly effective sales leaders versus marginal sales leaders, it's really simple. There are quarterly, monthly, and weekly cadences and practices that lead to getting a quarter done, why you get your people done. That rep development, getting the leading indicators done, working on deal strategy, it's all combined. That training isn't something you send people down to the HR department or learning department or enablement department. Coaching isn't something you send over to HR. It's all embedded into the operations of the business. And I like the next slide because I think it really simplifies the day in the life of a great sales leader. Again, I like these X and Y axes. On the X bottom right, if as a leader, you understand your rep's natural best swing and you're helping them build that and grow that, you understand where they are on their competence, their selling skills, and their acumen. That dramatically accelerates performance. Up the y-axis or the left-hand side, you really truly understand the intricacies of the deal and how you, again, based on the rep, help get them ready for that next interaction with the prospect. And then it all comes together through coaching, through great sales leadership is coaching. And I talk about this a lot. Sometimes I'll use this at some keynotes, and this is all that I speak from, because it resonates with all of us. Like, and again, if we were all together in an audience, these are the levels of selling. All right. There's apprentice, there's good. Good means you're at quota. Very good. You're at 50% of quota. And then you're exceptional. Okay. As I talk to CEOs and I say, okay, tell me what good means. They'll say, well, good means you're at quota. Okay. Well, typically in the industries that most of us are in, when you're at quota, you're making 250 grand a year. Some places a little less, some places a little bit more. All of a sudden, when I say to a CEO, okay, tell me about very good, they'll say, okay, well, they're anywhere from 25 to 75% above quota. They're awesome. And so, okay, great. How much do you pay them? Wow, they make, 500, sometimes 700 grand. Well, as an individual seller, the leap from good to very good, that's 3x earnings. What that means to your family and to your career. All right. Well, then when I ask CEOs about, okay, tell me about your exceptional reps. And what's fascinating, in hundreds of these conversations, not once has a CEO talked about quota. When they talk about exceptional, they never, ever talk about quota. They talk about they transform my company. They transform the industry. They've created more value, more financial value than a lot of the individual companies that we compete against. And that's our job as a leader, whether we run a company or we run a sales force. How do we take people from this apprentice, which, by the way, sometimes there's folks that have been selling for 10 years that are still apprentices because they've never got to quota, right? So how do we go from this apprentice to what do we do to get people good, which is B's? Then how do we get them to A's, which is very good? Then how do we get them to those A pluses? Because the financial impact of that is so enormous to our organization and so enormous to us as sellers. It transforms our life. And there's not a business problem in the world that can't be solved with more revenue. Like when you run a company, if revenue's working, you've got time and space to solve everything. And what that means, and all of us grew up selling, I remember my first really big commission check when I was a young man. It was like, it just felt really good that I made 5 times more than the guy who went on to become a surgeon who always made me feel bad in science class. That's an awesome feeling. And we owe that to people that work for it.
I think we all have one of those stories. All sales leaders have one of those stories that we kind of keep with us constantly. It's awesome.
And that's really how it comes together is, you've got to understand your people. We give you the science and the technologies to do that. You've got to understand your deals and how your people connect to them and to give you visibility to that. And then it ties together with the process and the technology, and all this overlays right onto your CRM that just simplifies your life as a business leader, as a sales leader, and as an individual rep, so that we have a measurement-based, practical way in which we move ourselves from good to exceptional.
Interesting. It's pretty slick. I mean, it reminds me of a quote. It's, work so hard you don't have to introduce yourself, right? So I've always kind of stuck with me. It's been kind of meaningless, but at the same time, it's like, work so hard that quota doesn't matter anymore, right? Quota is not a part of the equation when they speak of you, which is kind of an interesting take on being a salesperson, right? If they're not talking about how much you exceeded quota or 3, 4, 10x, right? But they're talking about how you transform their business. It's not a bad place to be.
No, right on. And Pete, it's kind of timely, again, we, both of us being former athletes, it's tomorrow's the NFL draft.
Yep.
Right. And just think about the track record of how GMs and coaches have gotten that wrong. And selling is a great parallel to selecting a quarterback. Like right now, that's the news. Everyone knows who's going to go first, who's going second, third, fourth. And everyone all of a sudden they go to the skills. They start talking about height. They start talking about arm strength, speed. They try to figure out how adept are they at these offenses, and they just get it wrong time and time again, because it really comes down to the intangibles. Who are those folks coming out of college that know their best swing, and that they're confident in doubling down on it, and that when times get tough, they rise to the occasion, and then they get paired with a great coach who understands who they are. And that's the formula to become exceptional, whether, the timeliness of this NFL draft thing that's happening tomorrow, or becoming an incredible value creator for your sales force and for yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, to round it out here, then I think we have a couple questions. So let me stop the share and jump in here. And Troy, that was awesome. Thank you so much for running through that. All right, got a couple questions here. How to assess from David Uzi? How to assess the critical skills in salespeople? Is there certain tests that you can give, or how have you done it previously, Troy?
Yeah. So, again, we've been doing this for a while, and, have some of the top, business psychologists on staff in the industry, and then doing it in a way where we've studied what are the questions that not only assess skill, but as you study salespeople and their track records, and you look at tens of thousands of their actual contribution to the income statement, it allows you to step back and get smarter. And so when we're looking at acumen and skills, we've created these situational judgment questions that, again, this just is a tool that hangs inside your CRM or whatever, your sales stack is. And it basically, rep by rep, you can go through, and it puts you in the position of these sales situations and gives you half a dozen ways to respond to it. And you can start to track what's the best answer, what's the worst answer, and you get really good reads on them. Then there's an additional way at which we do it, where the rep, you give them all of these critical selling behaviors, and it really takes, about 20 minutes for the rep to be really thoughtful on, how do I believe I perform on each one of these critical selling behaviors? Then my manager rates me on how they believe I perform on those critical selling behaviors. And then you roll that up, and you can see where the gaps or where the consistencies are. And those questions are actually sometimes maybe I get feedback that those questions are some of the best sales training that reps have ever gotten, because all of a sudden it's just not this conceptual thing where I'm sitting in some conference room at some airport Holiday Inn. I'm actually evaluating myself against these really critical, important behaviors as a seller. Whoops, Pete, you're
I'm muted. That was supposed to be the quote of 2020. We're not supposed to carry that over to 2021, but we're still doing it. Apologize for that. All right. From Caitlin, in what order do you rank the attributes that yield the greatest wins? So I believe she was talking about that pyramid. I can bring that up real quick. Let's see.
Yeah, and as you, Caitlin, thanks for the question. As you think through those attributes, it's if you, to use the parallel to Maslow's hierarchy, you got to have, food, water, shelter before you can self-actualize. And it really is this stair step here. And you can actually track win rate increases as you walk up this pyramid. So you can win a deal by just having a great relationship. You win a lot few of them this year than you did 10 years ago, but you can still win a deal, right? But as you then all of a sudden understand where your prospect is, and they rate you really high on listening and understanding, your win rate pops. And then if you can make that promise that we talked about, again, you see the win rates stair step up. Guidance, teach. And if, I was showing you that deal AI component that we have, when you get to teaching, your win rates are up around 80%, but you just can't jump to teach. You really do. You've got to build relationships. You have to understand, you have to listen, you have to create expectations, you have to make a promise. Again, you stair step your way up. And as you do it, that's where you can really dramatically affect win rates, time to close, and margin size. This pyramid actually also predicts target margin. It's crazy that when you get to teach, the attainment of target margin is up in the 90%. Whereas if you're winning deals just based on relationship, in a lot of organizations, your target margin rate is like sub 50% of what target margin is. You get taken to the cleaners during negotiation.
Because you can leverage that relationship to get in the door and get a deal done, but they're going to leverage it right back to make sure they get a deal themselves, right? It's a two-way street there. It's difficult.
Yeah, and when you get to teaching, like I want to pay you. I like as a buyer, I don't want to lose this relationship because it's a value to me. So I'm not going to squeeze you as hard on margin in the fear that you might go spend your time somewhere else. And so that's the thing, when you get to making promises, these become mutually beneficial relationships as opposed to just transactional relationships.
All right. From another question here about the promise. I knew this was going to come up. I figured that was a impactful point you made earlier, Troy. There's got a couple questions on. Can you expand on the promise and the best way to interpret that for a seller? So I think it's asking kind of how to go about it. What is a couple examples of promises that you can come up with there within the sales process?
Well, one of my partners, who I think is on the call today, Tim Geisert, is sort of a master at creating promises. And, depending on the product or service that you're selling and the level of the executive that you're interacting with, that's going to vary. But I'll just give you a couple real life client examples, and I'll try to be respectful of the individual so I don't embarrass them. But one of our clients that I talked about that made that dramatic leap in annual productivity, when they were delivering the value prop, we worked on their promise. And that promise, they were selling a technology platform for, remuneration management, awards and recognition. And it really started with, okay, before we get into the presentation here, everyone needs to share what's the single greatest moment of recognition you've ever had in your career. Well, all of a sudden, it's like, we're not demoing technology. We're not talking about your HR stack and how this plugs in. We're personalizing it. And as people reflect on that, it's like, okay, that's what we're going to do. How do we create more of those moments? Well, that's a special one. There's another client that we work with that sells a really advanced AI overlay for HRIS systems. And the promise that they've been able to make is, because you're trying to work your way to the chief HR officer, you're a lot of the time selling to the head of talent acquisition. And the promise that they're making is less than 10% of the people that have your job in the Global 2000 know the answer to the following 5 questions. And if you know the answer to these 5 questions, we can almost guarantee you will be a chief HR officer in the next 5 years of your career. That answering these questions will allow you to sit in your executive committee meeting and teach the executive committee something that they didn't even know about the talent of their organization. That before they even demo technology, get into the complexities of the integrations and why this is a better system than anything else that exists, that changes the room. That's different than running an incredible flawless demo. Now, it really helps if after you do that you can run the flawless demo and that you can paint great pictures about how this integrates and all the partnerships and all of the things that your competitors are talking about. But your competitor isn't talking about, I'm going to get you your dream job and here's how we're going to do it.
Awesome. That's fantastic. All right. We're running out of time here. Let's field one more question. If going to extend to teach and consult, how to avoid becoming a stalking horse? Makes sense there?
Yeah, no, I think that sometimes where you've got to make sure that you're individualizing it. That, like on that deal IQ stuff I was showing you, one of my there's all kinds of discovery questions embedded in there, but one of my favorite is very few salespeople know how their prospect or their influencer or buyer will be measured on the initiative. That differentiates you, like understanding how that influencer or that buyer is actually going to be measured on the outcome of this technology or the outcome of this initiative. That just, if you can get that answer and your buyers or prospects are transparent on that front, that takes you out of that stalking horse capability. That ensures that you're getting in deep on that relationship, and that all of a sudden you're partnering with them and thinking it through. But that's always a risk in selling, but it happens less often to those people that are completely aligned with the business outcomes and those that are teaching and delivering all the outsized value that we've talked about.
Awesome. Well, Troy, thank you so much for your time here today. Insane amounts of knowledge dropped on everybody here, which is, I am incredibly grateful. And hopefully we can get that VP of sales tenure back up to north of 2 years at some point with some of your teachings. But again, thank you so much. Really do appreciate the time, incredible knowledge, and hopefully again, till next time.
Yeah. And I just, again, love the team at Tenbound and all the work that you do. So keep it up.
Thank you so much. If you guys want to check out Octus IQ, we will send this deck out to everybody as well as the recording. So expect that in the coming days as soon as we edit it and make sure everything's good to send out. But thank you to Tim, to Troy, David, everyone from the Tenbound and Octus IQ teams. This was a fantastic webinar, and look forward to more in the future.
All right. All the best.
All right. We'll see you guys.